I'm Csaba Csere and I'm here with the 2013 Ford Fusion Hybrid. Ford redesigned the Fusion line completely for 2013 and the cars went on the market in late fall of 2012. It's a critical segment for Ford because these mid-size family sedans are the best-selling cars in the country. The Honda Accord and Toyota Camry, typically the automotive sales leaders, come from this segment. Now Ford wants to dig into their share, and they're doing it with this all-new car that comes with a variety of powertrains. There's at least 3 gasoline engines, there's a hybrid, there's a plug-in hybrid, and in this case we're going to be focusing on the hybrid model. But before we do that, let's go over the Fusion in general. Like all of the new Fords, this Fusion is a global car. It's going to be sold in essentially the same form around the world. In Europe, instead of calling it the Fusion, Ford calls it the Mondeo, but it's pretty much the same car except it has a different group of powertrains available. Like the recent new Fords, the Fiesta and the Focus, this Fusion has a European road feel to it. It's not a sports sedan, but the ride motions are well damped and controlled. The car goes where it's pointed, the steering has a little bit of weight to it, and overall it's a pretty satisfying driving experience, especially for a car that's geared towards fuel economy in the case of this hybrid. Even the tires, which are clearly optimized for low rolling resistance, have pretty good grip. Car and Driver measured cornering power of 0.85 Gs with this car, and that's excellent for a family sedan, let alone one that has really high mileage. The cabin is nice and quiet, but at low speeds like this, you can hear the 4-cylinder engine now and then. One of the secrets to excellent fuel economy is to run the engine at really low RPM, and a 4-cylinder can drone a bit at low RPM. Now Ford uses some active noise cancellation to counteract some of that drone, but you still hear it at this speed a little bit. The overall noise level really is very low in this car. We're at about 60, and wind noise is just barely there, and road noise is really quiet. We're not hearing a lot of bump thump from the uneven pavement, and tire noise is just non-existent. In fact, the engine noise is the loudest noise we hear at this speed. Not surprisingly, the front seat of the Fusion is very roomy. I'm about 5'11" and I have a ton of room above my head, and I even have the seat raised a little bit. Visibility is critical in a family sedan because you're driving in traffic, you're always looking around, and the Fusion's good that way too. The first thing I notice is that the outside mirrors are separated from the A-pillars. So instead of having a really wide blind spot, there's the mirror, and then there's a place where I can see, and then there's the A-pillar. And there's even a nice little quarter window up there to make sure I can really see through those two areas. If I'm changing lanes and need to look over my shoulder to see if anyone's in my blind spot, there's also a rear quarter window, and that gives me fairly good visibility, and plus the trunk line is low enough. So I can really see out of this car very well. Mid-size family sedans are really not known for their styling beauty, but a few years ago, Hyundai introduced a really pretty Sonata, and it sold very well. Ford has learned from that example, and they've made the Fusion one of the best-looking cars in the segment. Interestingly, when you look at this, you see some cues from a very expensive car, Aston Martin, that perhaps not coincidentally Ford used to own. This grille is very Aston-like, and the way the grille fits into this whole front of the hood, if you looked at the Aston Martin Rapide, you would see the common elements. If you go all the way to the back and you see the built-in spoiler and the way it kicks up, that has an Aston look to it as well. This has to be one of the prettiest cars in the segment, and that's going to be one of the keys to the success of this Fusion. Beautiful styling might sell a car, but a family sedan lives or dies on practicality, and the back seat is a big part of that. I'm in the back seat of the Fusion Hybrid, and I'm 5'11", sitting behind the front seat set for me. And I have plenty of space here. My feet easily fit under the bottom of the front seat. I've got knee room, headroom is decent, and I'm very comfortable here. Also, this rear seat is a reasonable height off the floor. Now, if I were 6'2", I might be a little bit crowded in this car, especially because this front seat would be further back. But I think for most people, this rear seat's going to be plenty comfortable. Another key element of practicality is the trunk. The Fusion's got a good-sized opening, the trunk is very well finished, and it would be a pretty good size, except for that big lump in the forward part, and that's where the battery is for the hybrid powertrain. Now, I'm a little surprised by how big it is because they've gone from a nickel metal hydride battery in the previous Fusion Hybrid to a lithium-ion battery in this one. And it's supposedly smaller and lighter, but that's still a big space. I'm guessing it takes up 1/4 to 1/3 of the existing trunk volume. But at least there's still a pass-through so you can get big objects into this trunk. I like the interior design of this Fusion quite a bit. This SE model has this metallic trim consistently throughout. We see it around the center console, around the instrument cluster, even stretching out into the doors, and that really ties the interior together. It's a nice design that's got sculpted elements, but it's not really overwrought. It looks very modern. At the same time, it's warm and comforting. And it has some nice features. For example, the side of the console where your leg might touch is actually padded a little bit, which very few cars have. Every car has got a padded dashboard up here, but they forget that you have touch points on your knees that also appreciate a soft surface. My view of the instrument cluster and the controls is very good, and overall Ford has done not only a good piece of interior design here, but the ergonomics are well laid out, and this is a very comfortable and easy car to drive. If there's one set of fussy controls, it has to do with the cruise control. The cruise control is operated by 3 flat, oddly shaped rocker switches on the left side of the steering wheel hub. They all feel exactly the same. You actually have to look down and see what you're pressing. Maybe after 3 years of driving, I would know which one is which, but it's not the most intuitive cruise control I've had. This Fusion SE is equipped with My Ford Touch with Sync, and that's basically Ford's latest infotainment system. Infotainment being one of those buzzwords that means information and entertainment. But you can see from this home screen what it covers. We have the phone, the navigation system, the climate control system, and the entertainment system. And in this home screen, each one of those systems has a quadrant and kind of just shows you the general status. We can see the temperature, we see what street we're on, the phone's connected, and right now the sound system's turned off. But if you hit the upper corner in each of those quadrants, it'll take you to a direct screen that gives you more detailed things to do. You hit the pictograph of the house and it goes back to the home screen. You can go right to navigation, and then you can enter a command or go from there. But it's a fairly simple system, but it's all touch screen, and you do have to pay attention to where you touch. Sometimes it's easier to just use voice commands if you happen to know them. For example, if I wanted to call myself, here's how I'd go about it. I hit the voice command button on the steering wheel.
Please say a command.
Call Csaba Csere.
Call Csaba Csere at home.
At home.
Calling Csaba Csere at home.
And there we go. Now I have a pretty unusual name, and in fact it's not pronounced Csaba Csere, it's pronounced Csaba Csere. But since my Ford Touch isn't Hungarian, I have to understand how it interprets those words. And so if you have someone with an unusual spelling of the name, you've got to sort of think about it a little bit how my Ford Touch might interpret that spelling and give it that phonetic pronunciation. But if you do that, it works pretty well. I mean, after all, if it'll call me, it'll call anybody. Another aspect of my Ford Touch is the main instrument cluster right in front of the driver. I've got a big speedometer in the center, which is very conventional, but there's a small LCD screen on either side. The right-hand LCD screen pretty much relates directly to this center screen. I control it with a little joystick in the steering wheel, and if I go up into entertainment and hit the button, right now it tells me audio is off. But if I turn audio on, it's telling me what we're connected to, and right now it's streaming Bluetooth audio from my phone, and it shows that on the screen. If we were actually on Sirius, for example, it would show me what channel we're on, and it would actually show me what song is playing, for example, on the 70s channel. So we can bring that up on the right-hand side there, or we can go out of the audio screen, go into the phone screen. I can actually pick some calls or go through my call history there and very quickly pick someone to call back. I can also go into navigation, and it'll have my favorite destinations and a few other options available there. As a person who always uses a radar detector, I really like what Ford has done with the console in this Fusion. There's actually holes on the side of the console, so I can route my power cord from the radar detector through this side hole into the power connector. And that way the cable isn't going across the LCD screen and across these touch buttons on the bottom. I've been on cars where the cable bouncing around on the touch buttons actually activates the controls and moves down the temperature, for example, and who wants to see the cable splitting the LCD screen? The Fusion setup eliminates those problems. The Fusion has the climate controls available in the big LCD screen with the My Ford Touch system, but all the Fusions don't have that screen, and besides, people like to be able to adjust their climate controls anytime they feel like it. So there's a secondary set of climate controls down below the screen. But it's also a very unconventional setup because there are essentially touch points right here. There are no knobs, there's no distinct buttons. It's pretty much a flat panel with just the smallest amount of sculpting, and you really have to pick exactly the right spot to make an adjustment. This setup looks pretty cool, but it's not as easy to use as separate buttons and knobs. One feature exclusive to Ford is this capless fuel filler. There's actually nothing to screw on and off. You simply stick in the gas pump, pump your gas, and when you're done, pull it out. No mess, no fuss. It's pretty crowded under the hood of this Fusion hybrid, and that's because these hybrid powertrains really do have a lot of bits and pieces. On this side, we have a 2-liter 4-cylinder engine. On this side, we have the electrical controller. Underneath it is a big electric motor, and it's in unit with the CVT transmission that combines the output of that motor and the gasoline engine and drives the front wheels. All of these pieces have to work together perfectly, and that's why we've got this big, powerful controller that not only thinks about how to manage these components, but also runs the electricity to them. You see these big orange cables? The orange there is to signify caution because underneath there are thick cables carrying high current and high voltage, and you really don't want to cut into those accidentally. Now, the key to making this work is this engine. It uses something called the Atkinson cycle, and that means it's about 10% more efficient than a conventional engine. Now, why don't all cars have that type of engine? Simply because they don't make any low-end torque, and it wouldn't work in an average car if it didn't have some help. The help here comes from the electric motor. The electric motor has lots of low-end torque. So when the gas engine is weak, the electric motor is available to make up the difference. So you get the more efficient engine without really paying for it in drivability. This engine has 141 horsepower. The electric motor has 117 for a total system output of 188 horsepower, and that moves this car along pretty well. Nobody buys a Fusion hybrid for maximum performance, but if you step on it, the car certainly goes quickly enough to keep up with traffic. It's actually a little bit slower than the last generation hybrid, and that's because the engine size is down and the overall system power is down by a few horsepower. Car and Driver measured 0 to 60 in 9.1 seconds. That's not going to win a lot of drag races, but it's plenty quick enough to keep up with normal traffic. Like the previous Fusion hybrid, this one uses essentially a CVT to blend the power of the gasoline engine and the electric motor as needed, and also to adjust the RPM as needed. There's no consistent steps like there are in a regular automatic transmission, and some people find that disconcerting. Here's what it does. What you heard there was that characteristic CVT behavior, where at full throttle, it takes the engine right to the power peak and stays there. So we were just sitting there at about 6,000 RPM, and we would have stayed at 6,000 RPM as long as my foot was to the floor. Fortunately, you don't get into that condition all the time. You only get there when you mash your foot to the floor and hold it. One of the other optional displays are the efficiency leaves, and this is a Ford exclusive on its hybrids and electric cars that tries to encourage you to drive efficiently. Basically, as you drive along, if you're driving very carefully and efficiently, new leaves will grow on that panel. And if you floor the throttle and start using up gas at a high rate, the leaves will be falling off. This is kind of about a medium panel now, but you can just about fill the whole thing with leaves if you're driving super carefully. We have another reconfigurable panel to the left of the speedometer, and this one has to do more with engine functions and with driving functions of the car. You go up at the top and you go into the display mode, and that's just a very simple one that shows your overall fuel economy and your miles to empty. If you go into the trip odometer, you can get a more detailed display, and like trip 1, That's what we've been getting ever since I had the car. We've gone over 340 miles and it says we're averaging about 36 miles per gallon. I actually think we're doing a little worse than that because it only thinks we've used 9.5 gallons of fuel, and I just put in about 10.5 over that same time period. But again, it gives you a rough idea of your fuel efficiency. By the way, to the right of that, you see the battery gauge that shows you the state of charge of the hybrid battery. And the arrow up means that you're charging the battery. An arrow down means the battery is discharging. And off to the right of that is your fuel gauge. And those are up all the time, regardless of which other displays you choose. There is a choice of trip odometers, so you can do an entire trip in shorter segments of that. And then if we pick fuel economy, it takes us to a driving coach. And there we've got 3 bar graphs that grade us on 3 aspects of driving: acceleration, braking, and cruising. And on acceleration and braking, I'm up near 3/4, which means I've been a reasonably good boy, but not a great boy. And on cruising, we're above 3/4, which probably reflects the fact that we've been driving on back roads at not real high speeds. But basically, it's another way for you to gauge your performance and see what areas you can improve on to get the best fuel economy out of the car. Then we also have information and settings screens, and this lets us adjust certain parts of the car, tell it whether to lock or unlock all the doors or just the driver's door, the usual sort of setup functions. One other efficiency feature in this Fusion Hybrid is the idle shutoff. Come to a complete stop and the engine turns off. And the idea is simple. An idling engine gets 0 miles per gallon. So why have the engine running when you're not moving? And it's very easy to implement on a hybrid because as soon as I move my foot off of the brake, the electric motor already starts powering the car even before the gasoline engine turns on. We're going to be seeing this feature more and more on non-hybrids because it does save a few percent in fuel economy and it's not very expensive to implement. But it works better on a hybrid because you've got that electric motor to give you the instant step off as soon as you want to get going. One of the things you don't have in a hybrid is that surplus power that makes passing effortless. This car is plenty fast enough for any reasonable road condition, but you're really going to work it hard sometimes to do a back road pass or to run at higher speed. And some other cars with more power can just do those without a lot of sound and effort. One way that hybrids squeeze more miles out of every gallon of fuel is regenerative braking. And what that is turning the electric motor into a generator when you step on the brake pedal. When you turn the motor into a generator, it actually makes electricity, but in doing so, it sucks energy out of the car, slowing it down. And that's why a hybrid often gets as good or better fuel economy in the city than it does on the highway, because in all that start-stop driving, on a gasoline car, all the power you use to accelerate the car is wasted when you stop, while on a hybrid, a lot of that power is recovered. But it isn't all recovered, and it's highly dependent on how you use the brake pedal. Keep in mind that the Fusion and all hybrids don't just have this regenerative brake, they also have conventional brakes so you can stop the car quickly. And so the key is to come to a stop using as much of the regenerative brake as possible and as little of the friction brake as possible. Let me demonstrate the difference in 2 stops. Here's a full stop from 50, full ABS as fast as we can stop the car. Our brake coach tells us that we've only recovered 5% of the energy in that stop. And that's because in a hard stop like that, most of the stopping was done by the conventional friction brakes. And by the way, the Fusion Hybrid has quite good brakes. Car and Driver measured a stop from 70 miles an hour and 177 feet, and that's very good for a family sedan. Now I'm going to do another stop from 60 miles an hour in which I try and get the maximum amount of regen from the car. That was 89%, clearly a lot better than 5%, and it's actually pretty hard to get 100%, although you can do it from lower speeds if you really concentrate. But the point is, how you brake with this car definitely affects its efficiency. If you're one of those people who tends to drive at the speed limit until they're within 100 yards of a red light and then brake hard at the end, you're not going to get great mileage with this car. On the Fusion, all of these efficiency systems, the efficiency leaves, the brake coach, and the overall driving coach are just designed to help you make the most of the hybrid system and get the most mileage out of the car. It's also kind of a game you can play. If you're really into your driving and you've got too many speeding tickets, this is kind of a different driving competition you can engage in. It's not nearly as exciting as driving 20 or 30 over the speed limit, but it's something that can totally engage you to see if you can do the best on the efficiency aspects of this car. One thing to remember when talking about hybrid fuel economy is that your mileage does vary depending on how you drive, just like it does in a conventional car. If you're accelerating hard all the time, if you're braking late and not using regen, you're clearly going to get worse mileage than if you drive gently. One other consideration when talking about hybrid fuel economy is simply the speed at which you're driving. In all cars, your fuel economy varies with speed, but with conventional cars, it's a fairly flat curve, and there's not much difference between, say, 30 and 50 miles per hour. In a hybrid, however, because the powertrain can adjust how much power is coming from the electric motor and the gasoline engine and operate more efficiently, there's a pretty steep curve. I measured the fuel economy of this Fusion hybrid from 30 to 80 miles per hour in 10 mile per hour increments, and the difference is more than 2 to 1. And you can see that it drops from over 60 miles per gallon at 30 down to about 30 miles per gallon even at 80. So you drive this car faster and your mileage is going to go down. One of the strongest features of this Fusion hybrid is its EPA fuel economy. It's rated at 47 miles per gallon city, 47 miles per gallon highway, 47 miles per gallon combined. That's really a terrific number for a car this big. And in fact, it's about the highest rated hybrid except for the conventional Prius, which is in fact a smaller car on the outside than this one. The problem is, people aren't really getting that kind of mileage. I've been driving this Fusion hybrid the way I drive all my test cars. Speed limit plus 5 miles per hour. And with most of my test cars, I come very close to the EPA combined fuel economy estimate with that driving style. Unfortunately, with this Fusion hybrid, I'm more than 20% below the combined number. Consumer Reports recently came out and said that they got 10 miles per gallon less than the 47 claim. And our trip computer says we're getting about 36 miles per gallon, and I think it's reading a little high based on the amount of fuel I just added to the car when I refilled it. That's really unfortunate because if you buy this car expecting to get 47, I don't see how you're going to get it. Now, most hybrids have greater difficulty achieving their EPA numbers in the real world than conventional cars do. But typically in other hybrids I've seen, we're 5 to 10% below the EPA numbers, not 20% like this Fusion is. So there's definitely something going on here with the Fusion hybrid. On the other hand, 35, 36 miles per gallon in a car of this size is very good, especially given that a lot of my driving has been city and slow speed driving. The regular version of the Fusion would probably get 25 miles per gallon under those same conditions. So while we're not getting 20 miles per gallon more than the regular Fusion, we are getting 10 miles per gallon more, and that's a useful increase. I spent about a week behind the wheel of this Fusion hybrid, and I have to say it's a pretty good car. It's good looking, it's comfortable, it's quiet, it's smooth, and for everyday transportation, it's really a delightful car to drive. Now, it's not really for a car enthusiast because it can't go fast enough, and if you try and make it go fast, it starts getting a little noisy and it really doesn't like that. But for everyday driving, it's terrific, and it gets pretty good fuel economy. Right now, the Fusion hybrid has only 3 competitors: the hybrid versions of the Toyota Camry, Hyundai Sonata, and Kia Optima. But an Accord hybrid will be coming, and probably an Altima hybrid later on. But for now, I think this is a prettier car than the Camry, and it goes down the road better than the Camry does. And it gets similar fuel economy, although the EPA numbers actually promise quite a bit more. So if you really want an everyday family sedan that gets very good mileage, this Fusion hybrid is a great choice. Just don't expect to get over 40 miles per gallon if you drive it normally. I'm Csaba Csere. See you next time.